On today's show, going to be talking about my thoughts on Game 7. I know it's a couple days old now, but want to share some of those with you. And then in segments 2 and 3, talk about the most important lessons from the season. This is Locked On Nuggets.
You are Locked On Nuggets, your daily Denver Nuggets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody, and welcome to the Locked On Nuggets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We appreciate you making this your first listen each and every day, your team every single day. I'm your host, Adam Mares. Flying solo today. Matt did it on Monday. I'm going to do it today, and we'll probably link back up starting next week as we start to kick off the offseason. But I want to dive into some topics. So first, we'll talk about Game 7. Now, I've done this a couple times now between All NBA show and the DNVR show. I've talked about my thoughts on Game 7, but because I haven't given them here, I want to try to give some unique perspectives on this over here on this platform as well. The first thing I think about Game 7 is that it was a winnable game, and that's going to be the toughest part. If you would have asked me, one of the things that really, I think, hurts for Nuggets fans about this season and how it unfolded is there was an unwavering belief that if a game was winnable, Jokic would get the game over the finish line, and Jokic and Murray in particular. I don't know that Nuggets fans felt that way after how this playoffs played out. Like in the moment when Denver was up 20, I think everybody felt pretty good about the way the game was going. But I don't know that people had the same confidence that, okay, there's no way Denver can blow this. Like you would have felt that way last year. There's no way Denver can blow a 20-point lead. This year, things just were a little different. And to be honest with you, things had felt off to me personally since that Spurs game. That was, Murray's return. They play, they get the win over Minnesota, and they immediately follow it up with that game. And you think, things that was weird. That's very un-Nuggets like to fumble it in that way. You almost, in fact, I think at the time we asked, was that intentional? Did Denver do that on purpose because they're trying to mess with standings or something? Didn't make sense. So the first thing is, I think that there was something off with this team, and we'll talk about some of those things later on. But that was a winnable game, and that's what's so frustrating. If Denver wins that one, do they go on to win a title? Maybe, maybe not. I know that not everybody believed that maybe there was a fatigue factor with the team. Maybe there was a lack of belief. I think that was probably a big part of it. And I will say, I think that Timberwolves team reminded you so much of Denver last year in that they had this confidence, this belief, and a hunger that was absent in Denver. And the reason I bring that up is that's not something I ever would have questioned about Murray and about Jokic and about Porter and Gordon, all those guys, that they would be the team with the second most sort of hunger. Maybe it's championship hangover. I think everybody, look, this season was not not the most enjoyable for me personally. There were times it felt like a slog. Talking to some people with the team, felt like the players felt that way as well, that there was times where the season was a slog. We'll talk about that at the end as well. But the belief part of it is the thing that was so tough because it makes you wonder, we kind of felt like Denver was a team of destiny last season and maybe for years to come. Like, hey, man, they're special for these reasons. They play connected and all this different stuff. They didn't have that advantage over the Timberwolves. The Timberwolves probably, if anything, had that over the Nuggets. And even in that third quarter, when they went up 20 and then give up like a 5-0 run, there was a confidence in the Wolves that was almost absent in the Nuggets. The Nuggets just looked dead tired and pained to be out there. And the Nuggets were clearly tired. That's obviously one of the big takeaways from Game 7. I don't think there's any way you can deny it. And all this stuff we're talking about with winnable game and belief and confidence and swagger and all those different things, the Nuggets were clearly too exhausted to draw into that reserve, or the reserve was out, however you want to say it. Lastly, the Michael Porter Jr. struggling part of this is meaningful to me as well, because this is 2 series in a row that were against physical defenses where he struggled. The Lakers, the Suns, last year, the Lakers as well. Those were talented superstars, but not necessarily elite defensive teams, physical defensive teams. He didn't have physical matchups in those ones. The fact that the Heat and the Timberwolves are the 2 physically toughest teams that he faced and that he played so poorly, to me, I'm not saying it means everything, but it doesn't mean nothing. There's something that you have to draw from that and say, that's all right. We have some data now to say that if you get into that type of series, he has not performed well in the past. So if you get into a series next year where that's one of the margins and you say, okay, well, that should be a spot for him, but they're not as good. They're tough defensively and physical. You're going up against Dylan Brooks or something like that, where you're like, yeah, he's better. Denver's better. But now you will worry and say, hey, but is that going to disrupt him? Is he going to get tight? Is he going to shy away from some of the physicality and maybe not be his best self? Is he not going to shoot the ball well? That miss he had where he missed the rim wide right and long, those are shots that are going to stick with you. I mean, we make fun of Paul George, who's been great in the playoffs in the early part of his career and has had great games, but we joke on him because he hit the side of the backboard one time. You know, now you're going to look with Michael Porter and always be worried, I think, a little bit that a shot like that is going to come off of his wrist. And then my last note about this one is kind of funny. I love Yoke. Yoke can almost do no wrong. After the game, you know, Anthony Edwards, when they beat the Phoenix Suns, he gives the suck it sign, you know, to the fans, and he kind of clowns on them. That's their style. Jaden McDaniels all year has tried to do one last shot. Nobody in the NBA really does this where it's like, all right, 8 seconds left, just dribble out the clock. Jaden McDaniels has multiple examples this year where he takes one of those shots and it's kind of an FU, right? Like it's kind of clowning on you. Jamal Murray did this year's back, by the way, to Lonzo Ball. If you guys remember, game was over and he dribbles in between Lonzo Ball's legs, just as a kind of an FU, like yeah, we got you. Whatever. Some guys do it. Some guys don't. Most guys don't in the NBA, but some guys have that energy. Anthony Edwards, Jaden McDaniels, they clearly have that energy. Guess what? It's not right or wrong. I am glad that Jokic, our superstar, does not do those things. I'm glad that he has like a very interesting grace to him in victory and in defeat. But those things, you don't get to tell a player not to do that. And I thought walking off the court, you know, Anthony Edwards is waving to the crowd, telling them to go home. And Jokic goes over there to talk to him. And I'm sure he said something like, hey, have some class, try to have some class. And Anthony Edwards tells him to get out of here or whatever. My thing with this is, Yoke, you could have sent him home. Like that's the thing is, there's always something at stake when you're in a series. It's like your philosophy versus my philosophy. And Jokic unfortunately lost the philosophy battle. Like, because you lose the battle, they get everything. So while I'm with him that I don't like when players are sort of like stunting on your grave, when they win, they get a chance to do that. And for me, I look at that and I go, Jokic, part of why we all loved the Nuggets being on top is it felt like we talk about ethical hoops and we love this. And now, oh, everybody has to like, you know, our humble king is now on top. But when you get beat, they get to dance on your grave. And the only way to get them back is to get them back next year and to take that a little bit more personally than it seemed like the team took it this year. And so that's one of my notes I had for this one. Obviously, there's some takeaways, though, from the season that we're going to get to. That's just game 7. It's a couple days old, so I didn't want to spend too much time on it. But when we come back from break, we'll talk about the real takeaways. I've been thinking about lessons from this season, and we'll get to those on the other side. Before we do, though, I want to tell you about BetterHelp. It's the summertime, and maybe you're starting to reflect a little bit about your position in life. Maybe it's a relationship that you're in or a relationship you're thinking about getting into. Maybe it's something with work or you changing career fields, and you just want to get some advice from somebody experienced with how to provide that type of advice and walk you through something. Or maybe you're just going through a hard time in life right now, mentally and emotionally, and you want somebody to sort of share your thoughts and feelings with. Well, BetterHelp is here for you. They do a lot of great things in pairing you with somebody who is a professional who can walk you through and talk about the different boundaries in your life and the different things you're thinking about. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you do is fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. So you find somebody that fits your lifestyle, fits your schedule, and most of all, fits you and what it is that you're trying to do. So get it off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. You get 10% off your first month. We'll be right back with more Locked On. Back here, segment 2 of the Locked On Nuggets podcast. Don't forget, Matt Moore will be back. Swipe a Cam will be back later in the week as we kind of alternate and get into off-season mode. But let's talk about some of the lessons that must be learned from this season. Every year, win or lose, you have to learn some important lessons. And there's a handful in particular that I think are most important. Number 1 to me is about Jamal Murray. I've said this for years. Jamal Murray has used the regular season to get himself in shape. Don't believe me? Because go back to media day when he talked about that. Somebody asked him, hey, you know, are you ready to pick up where you left off? Are you ready to kind of hit the ground running like you did last year after winning the title? Are you ready to be at that level and maybe make an all-star game? And he laughed about it. He actually laughed out the idea that an all-star or an all-NBA would be one of his goals, which is wild to me from a selfish standpoint, because he had a lot of money at stake if he made all-NBA. in a weird way, you almost tip your hat to him because he could have put his own individual success above the team's and gone out and gunned all year for that honor, gotten it maybe at the expense of a team. He didn't do that. That would have been bad. But at the same time, Jamal Murray has always been a slow starter. He's always looked a little out heavy-footed and out of shape and then gotten himself into shape. Even if he didn't get hurt, because I think the story of the season really comes down to the Nuggets started to roll after the All-Star break. Jokic sends a text, inspires everybody. Boom, it's go time. Everybody gets into playoff mode and probably would have stayed in that mode to some degree. But Murray gets hurt. And then everybody has to step up their game a little bit more. But more importantly, Jamal Murray missed 23 games this year. It's kind of on par. It's a little bit more. Usually he misses about 18, 19 games over the last 5 seasons. This year he missed 23. And there's a cumulative wear and tear on everybody else, mentally, emotionally, and most of all, physically, when you have to carry for a superstar who is not playing like a superstar. I don't think Jamal Murray played like a superstar this year. And I think it cost the Nuggets a lot. And it's weird to say because they won 57 games, but they did that with 23 games not being played by their second best player. I think Jokic was both exhausted, but more importantly, annoyed in some of his comments in the post game. It really is what served as an exit interview for Jokic. I think it demonstrated some of that annoyance and then how hard it is on him to have to carry the team. And it's almost like, and we do this too as analysts, we do this as fans. Yoke's got us, right? Like we always use that phrase, Yoke's got us. And I think there was a little bit too much Yoke's got us in the Nuggets over the last 2 years. Last year was understood. Jokic comes into the year and says, Murray's going to suck for the first 20 games. I'm going to have to carry him. And he does. But this year, I think there was a little bit of a, why isn't he better? Why can nobody take time off? Why is all of this happening? The team didn't have the same hunger or belief. And Murray even said this after in his exit interview, talking about it was a different energy being the hunted instead of the hunter. And it was exhausting to do. And it was exhausting. Imagine if it was exhausting for him, imagine what it was like for the guys that played 23 more games. And the last point for Murray here is, has his window passed to be an all-star? Now, this is a little bit, I'm making this is like a clickbaity almost way to phrase this. But the point is, we all had this belief when Murray went down that he was an all-star caliber player, but maybe because of Jokic's greatness or maybe because of team sacrifice, he's not going to get the accolades of some of the other guys who have gotten all like a Devin Booker, but he's a better team player. And then when it matters, his game goes up another level. But now you look at it and go, okay, he's 26, he'll be 27 next year. Are we sure he's going to be? I always thought he would be an all-star at some point. He'll get it together. He'll kind of elevate. He'll get better every year in ways that it's like it's inevitable that he'll be an all-star. But now I look at it and I go, after this year, will he be an all-star? Like next year, the idea of him becoming an all-star is hard to fathom. It's like he would have to make an enormous leap and then sustain that. He would have to be at the level of play we've seen him at his best, but then sustain it for a period of time we've never seen him come close to doing. So then it asks, do we still believe he can become an all-star? I think now I have less faith in that than I did, 2 months ago, for sure, by quite a big margin. And then you go to, okay, well, can Denver be a 1 or 2 or 3 seed without that? Or are you asking Jokic to carry so hard? Like he's carried for the last 5 years. We're going to get into some of these numbers here later. Are we asking him to continue to do that as he enters his 30s? And is that realistic? Do you start to ask for guys to carry a team at that age with the usage and games played that Jokic does in minutes and everything else? Murray has to save the day here. He has to save the day. He has to be able to carry this team. First of all, just from it's a marathon, 82 games. You need Murray to win like 20, 25 games for a year. That's not crazy to ask. You ask that of every second star in the NBA. Are you capable? LeBron has Anthony Davis. Can you be the best player for like 20, 25 games and I'll be the best player for 50, 60? That's a fair trade-off when you talk about first and second best player, especially in a regular season. I think Murray is well below that or was well below that the last 2 seasons. And next year, that can't be the case. You've got to be able to give Jokic games where you're the best player and he can do some of the other stuff. But it's not just about rest. It's also about identity. I think that the Nuggets had a bit of an identity crisis in this playoffs, and it actually happened last year to a much smaller degree. If you recall last year in the very few losses that you had, especially game 2 of the finals, one of the questions you walked away from was Murray shooting a little much. Like the rhythm, the balance of that is a little bit out of whack, and it needs to have that perfect harmony. You find that perfect harmony through the rhythm throughout the regular season. And like I said, coming out of the All-Star break was the only time where I felt like the Nuggets had that, because I felt like they spent the All-Star break changing their mentality, getting in a little bit better shape and saying, okay, it's go time, But then, of course, he got hurt, maybe because he ramped up too quickly or what have you, or wasn't able to physically sustain that level of play for more than 9 games, and he gets hurt. And it throws off your identity. It throws off your momentum. It throws off all year. And by the way, some of the stuff I'm saying, it's partly my opinion, partly like it's an informed opinion from talking to people and from listening to these pressers. One of the things that Jokic said all year down the stretch, when people would ask him, is it health? Is it the 1 seed? What's most important? And he would always give an answer that nobody would give, which is we have to figure out how to play our brand of basketball. If we can play our brand of basketball by the time we get to the playoffs, then we'll be fine. I really think what he's talking about is this. Like, our team needs to play the way we're going to win for like consistent period of time. And that's how we're going to know what we are. I don't think Denver did that. And in part because of how injured Murray was for most of the year. And I think he was injured for most of the year because he has never elevated his game. Get ready, stay ready so you don't have to get ready. I don't think he's ever stayed ready long enough for Denver to be able to establish that. And by the way, there's a trickle down effect to this. Murray is tasked with running the bench. A lot of the young bench players did not grow in the degree that they should have grown this year. And Murray, being a max contract player and being the second best player, in my opinion, should take on a lot of the burden there. He's talked about Christian, like, it's my project. I'm working on him. Great. You got to work on everybody else too. Zeke Naji is also your project. Peyton Watson should be your project. Julian Strother is your project. That's what it is to be a leader if you want to win championships. And I just don't think he was up for that and or available for that enough this year. Number 2 is rest and healthy. You have to rest and health are more important than just about anything. It's ironic that in a year where the Nuggets' stated goal repeatedly was not to get the 1 seed, it's not like last year. This year it's going to be competitive, and we can't overvalue that they entered the season neither healthy nor rested. It's ironic that they won a franchise record 57 wins in a game when regular season wins were on the record stated not an important goal for them. You look at it and you say the whole point of getting a higher seed is so that you have home court in a game 7, and you lost. Why did you lose? Because of fatigue. They had the right philosophy, stated goal, but the execution of that, I think, was a little bit panicky. And I went through the numbers because I was so curious of this. The modern NBA is different than the NBA Classic. Historically, the 1 seed has won about half of the time. If you go back 70 years or whatever of NBA finals, the number 1 seed has won about half of the time in the playoffs. But that's not true of the last 6 years. Twice it's been a 1 seed, including the Denver Nuggets. Twice it's been a 2 seed. Twice it's been a 3 seed. The reason I bring this up is I think that it's still true that it's hard. It's going to be hard to win a championship if you're like a lower seed right from the get-go. But I think that Adam Silver's stated goal for the NBA is to bring parity to the NBA. Parity with some of these rules, with how much three-point shooting is, and quite frankly, how much talent there is. I don't know that there's, the top-end talent throughout eras. There's always been great players. But I think the versatility, the shooting, and the skill development, the players of today's league are standing on the shoulders of giants. In some ways, they're worse. There's certainly aspects that we have lost through time, but things like shooting, scoring, and basic skill work, I think, is at an all-time high. And as a result of that, you have variance. You have more teams that are capable of their 4th, 5th, and 6th best players making major impacts on a series in a way that maybe wasn't true of 20 years ago. So now you look at it and go, okay, over the last 6 years, a little bit of everything has won. And by the way, one of those 1 seeds was the bubble, the Lakers bubble. Not that that doesn't count, but I'm just showing you that if there was one outlier, it's actually the 1 seed is the outlier over the last 6 years. Regular season wins matter, but equally as important is health, rest, and identity, and knowing who you are. And this is why, in my opinion, the Miami Heat have been very good over the last few years, despite being lower seeds, is they have absorbed that concept more than anyone else. And Denver's going to have to absorb that concept because we know how good their core players are, including Nikola Jokic. We know how good he is. You need to get guys up to snuff around him more so than you have so far. And then my last one here is the Nuggets just have to find rest for Jokic. Somebody was arguing, or somebody brought it up in my mention. I didn't even respond to him, saying, Adam, you're wrong. Jokic played the 23rd most minutes this year. Check your facts or something like that. Jokic played the 3rd most minutes of any player in the NBA since 2020. Since 2020, we're talking about 4 seasons now, a little over 4 seasons. 500 minutes more than number 4, who, by the way, is Anthony Edwards at 22 years old. Jokic, of all the guys at the top of that list, like in the top 20, he's the only center. He's 300 pounds or 280 pounds, and he's played more minutes than all but 2 players. I think the guys ahead of him are Mikal Bridges and Jason Tatum. Those are the only guys, by the way, both young, both skinny guys, completely different than a 280-pound center. The Nuggets have ridden Jokic for the last 4 years, and he's been a good soldier. He doesn't miss a ton of games, knock on wood. He steps up and he plays consistently great basketball. That can't be the case, though, as he enters his 30s. It just can't. If you think you can replicate the last 5 years of Jokic's workload over the next 5 years, you're going to end up seeing a guy break down, if not physically and missing games. I was disappointed in Yoke's ability to dig through in Game 7 when they were up 20. Great players shouldn't blow 20-point leads in the second half, even in the modern NBA. But I am sympathetic to him in that he looked absolutely exhausted and gassed and like he had nothing. And I look at it and I go, yeah, I would probably be gassed too if I was asked to do as much as he does. At some point, it was all going to break for him. And it looked like it broke in this series and in this playoff run where finally Yoke didn't have the ability to tap into that any deeper than he already had. So the Nuggets have to find a way to get rest for Jokic. And that rest does not necessarily mean missing games. I'm not advocating for load management. I'm saying that Jokic can't be asked to save them 40 times a year like he has for the last four or 5 years, where it's like, why are we a 57-win team? Well, Jokic won like 27 games single-handedly for us this year because we had to ride him like crazy. You can't do that. You've got to start spending the regular season where he can be a little bit more in his groove, pick his spots, and not be tasked with carrying a team through the finish line year after year after year because everybody else is tired and injured. All right, we'll take a break. On the other side, I'm going to wrap up with 2 more takeaways, including why the Nuggets need to start changing the way they use their rotation. We'll do that on the other side. First, I want to tell you about the Game Time app. It's that time, middle of the week, where you start to look at your plans for the weekend and decide what you want to do. Do you want to go to a sporting event in your area? Maybe a baseball game. Maybe you're in one of the cities where there's a playoff game and you want to check it out if there's last-minute ticket deals. Well, just hop on the Game Time app, and you can find last-minute tickets, flash deals, zone deals, the best value you're going to find for tickets, lowest price guaranteed, even cancellation protection, job loss protection, and more. And then you can see every seat in an arena. It'll give you that view. So you can click on it and be like, okay, what's my view look like from here? Is it good? Do I like it? Where is it in relation to the bench or whatever it is you're looking for? But what I love about the Game Time app is if you don't know what's going on in your neck of the woods, you can always just hop on there and see what events are going on or festivals. There's always some kind of festival or event that you had no idea was happening. You hop on the Game Time app, you see it there, and you can buy tickets right away. So download the Game Time app and create an account and use Locked On NBA for $20 off your first purchase. Again, redeem that code with Locked On NBA for $20 off. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. We'll be back with more Locked On. All right, back here at final segment, talking about lessons that have to be learned this season by the Denver Nuggets. Lessons that have to be learned. I think the next one is that you've got to start staggering more. We've talked about this a lot, but Michael Malone, it's a trait of his, and I don't know why it's a trait of his, but he loves playing the starters together more than anybody else in the NBA by a wide margin. I brought this up the other day, I think, over on DNVR, but the Nuggets starting lineup was the number 1 most used 5-man lineup in the regular season, despite the fact that Jamal Murray missed 23 games. And I think the starters collectively only played like 50 or 48 games or something like that. They were still the number 1 most used lineup, more used than the Oklahoma City Thunder starting lineup, which played 15 more games together and still had fewer minutes by like 200 than the Denver Nuggets. The number 11th most used 5-man lineup is the starters, but with Reggie Jackson instead of Jamal Murray. What that tells you is Michael Malone loves to play a rotation. We all know this, loves to play a rotation where things are mostly either the same 5 or 4 of the same 5, and then flip that and play either 5 bench guys or 1 starter with the bench. And he's done this for forever. And I put this out on Twitter the other day, not a popular tweet, I'll be honest with you. Not a popular tweet. People were pushing back on it, although I think they'll understand as I make this point, saying that Zeke Naji this year, of his roughly 550 minutes, 4/5 of them came without a single starter or with just 1 starter, mostly Jamal Murray, on the court. Now, I'm not going to become the Zeke Naji guy. I'm not going to do that. He has had opportunities and he has not made the most of them. But you do wonder about what kind of formula is it? Like, what players in the NBA would thrive if they only got to play with one of your 5 best players at any given time, only throughout the course of the season? And, oh, by the way, was Jamal Murray great this year, especially with the bench? No, he was terrible. He did not play like a regular starter. He kind of played like a below average one. What you really played with was Reggie Jackson, who became the identity of those minutes for most of the year. He was the guy that everyone else had to mold their games around. Is that a winning formula for a young player to say, okay, 4/5 of your minutes are going to be with none of our good players and with one player who's especially hard to be a good player off of in Reggie Jackson? He's not a setup guy. He's a shoot guy. and you've got to build around it? I would say no. And while, again, Zeke Naji has had opportunities over the years, most of his career has come in that exact circumstance, which is not a favorable circumstance to him. Then you look at Peyton Watson, almost the exact same story. Christian Brown, almost the exact same story. Jalen Pickett, almost the exact same story. Jalen Pickett barely played this year, and almost all of his minutes were with 0 starters, and a few of them with 1. None of his minutes were with the regular ones. In fact, I was comparing. The reason I wanted to start doing this was looking at, okay, call-in minutes with Jokic versus Pickett minutes with Jokic. Obviously, not even comparable, not even close. But then when you zoom in and go, okay, what about just any two starters? You're like, oh, he didn't play any minutes the entire season with 2 starters. He just didn't do it. To me, I look at that and I say, if you're really bought into development, you've got to play guys with Jokic. And again, does that cost you a win here or there? Does it cost you another MVP for Nikola or all this stuff? It probably does, but Denver is turning a chapter now. That chapter is, we have to get those guys. If the stated goal is we can't afford to have better players, if we can't afford to bring in a bunch of free agents and sign a bunch of guys, which is true, Denver's not going to have that flexibility. If you have to have cheap contracts, then you've got to invest in those guys. And the best way to invest in them is to have them play with Nikola. Denver did not do that in any capacity today or this season. And more to the point, a player like Reggie Jackson is just such a, like, what do you learn from playing off of Reggie Jackson? Is that the same lessons you would learn from playing off somebody else? I don't think so. And I think it set Denver up to fail and for those guys to fail. They've got to stagger more. They've got to find different combinations. I don't think it makes that much sense not to stagger. I think there are a lot of like Michael Porter for years. We've talked about, he doesn't necessarily need to be with Jokic at all those minutes. There's ways you can kind of build around him and play Christian Brown and Peyton Watson and get those guys real experience playing the type of minutes they're going to play in a playoffs and know what you look like and hopefully say, okay, like Michael Porter did this, where it was, how do you play off of Jokic? What does my game look like? He learned 3 or 4 little moves like, oh, here I come off of a flare screen, I'm going to slip it. And now he gets hit for that, once every other game or so. That becomes a thing. You need to develop those with Peyton Watson. Is he a good offensive player? No. But if you give him 2,000 minutes with Jokic, it's like, okay, now he's got 2 or 3 things he does that Nikola always knows to look for. Oh, it's that inverted screen and they do this thing. They need to develop those types of things so that then they become positive players. So next year, to me, it's just, they have to stagger more. I don't think it makes sense for them to play the way that they play. The next one is, and this is an interesting one, a curious one. This season felt like a slog to them. It felt like a slog to me, but it felt like a slog to them. I think if you were to give them true serum, and when I say them, I mean Jokic and Murray and Michael Malone, and you said, hey, rank all of your seasons here in Denver from best to worst, I think this one would come in kind of low. There was something off about the vibe where this felt a bit like a chore. And I always remember Tim Conley telling the story when he was here about, he's asked Jokic, how long are you going to play? And he'd say, as long as I'm enjoying myself, I'll keep playing. That is a line that always sticks in my head. Cause I look at this and I go, Jokic didn't look like he had a lot of fun this year. And I think part of that was, there is an energy that is brought to this idea, the title defense, and we got to do this, and we're freaking out after every loss. Even though you come out of the All-Star break and say, we're not worried about the 1 seed, well, you're freaking out after every single loss and going berserk. I think this year was just a bit of a slog. And I think Denver is going to have to find a way to instill some joy back into the organization. And some of the ways you do that is with some personalities. I always talk about, it's not just an on-paper league. You don't just say, oh, we need ball handling, you need some 3-point shooting, you need some spacing. Sometimes what you need is personality. You need a guy that just brings a joy and understands people. We have at our company, we have Eric Lacroix, who was a role player in hockey. He was obviously Pierre Lacroix's son. He is one of the greatest glue guys I've ever met personally, because he is such a just nice guy, emotional IQ through the roof. Superstar Dev's a little bit like this in DNVR as well. But Eric Lacroix, he was the guy that he knew his role on a team was to go and throw an arm around a shoulder for a guy and be like, hey man, I know coach is being hard on you, but listen, this is why he's doing it. Sometimes you need that guy that just understands the emotional moment that a team is in. He understands what a guy needs. Sometimes he needs love. Sometimes he needs tough love. Sometimes he needs to be kicked in the butt a little bit. I think Denver might've been missing the joy this year. And again, some of that might have come, I honestly believe some of that probably came from Jamal's absence, that there was a collective, it's like a group project and one guy called in sick 2 days in a row. And you're like, are you kidding me, man? We are just going to, I guess we'll all get credit for whatever happens here. but we need you to start doing it. I think some of that weighed down the Nuggets a little bit this year, but I also just think they were missing some of the personalities that are required to come into a team and say, hey, I know it's a slog, but it's all going to be worth it. And to keep everybody on the straight and narrow. And then my last lesson, and this is the scariest one, but also the hardest one, and perhaps most important one. Jeff Morton had a great article up on Denver Stiffs today, and I'll probably talk about it more later on in the afternoon show, but don't take Jokic for granted. We always say this. Michael Malone always says this, and I think when we say that, it usually means Jokic put up a 30, 15, and 12 game, and we say, it was a B-plus game. A lot of people say that's taking Jokic for granted. I don't think it is. Jokic's such a great player that we grade him on a different scale. We know when Jokic had 34, 18, and 12, or 34, 18, and 7 in the game 7, and I still felt like he had more to offer. We know Jokic is that way. Don't take him for granted I don't think Jokic would ever demand a trade for Denver. It's not about would he want to ask out or this or that. It's more, it's never going to be like this again. I don't think we'll ever have a player of Jokic's caliber again. Murray can't take Jokic for granted. Aaron Gordon can't. Michael Malone can't. Calvin Booth can't. And most importantly, the Cronkies can't. It'll never be this good again. You should spend more money on the team in this moment in time than ever again in Nuggets history or in Nuggets future, because the odds of you having a player of Nikola Jokic's caliber will never be this high. Don't take him for granted, and don't think that you have time, because these things open and close so much faster than you realize. And you'd never want to look back and say, well, we could have done this or we could have done that. Denver this year felt a little bit like taking Jokic for granted. And again, he was part of, the team lost collectively. It's not like the team failed Nikola. Nikola was part of what failed here. But I do think there is a level of don't take it for granted. Jamal Murray will never play with a player of his caliber again. Michael Porter will never play with a player of his caliber again. And you got to maximize those moments. As an organization, you have to do everything to be on the same page with him. What is he seeing out there? He's a really smart guy. What is he thinking and feeling? And if that goes against the vision of Calvin Booth, then you need to change your vision. If that goes against the vision of Michael Malone, you need to alter your vision. Don't take Jokic for granted is probably the biggest lesson of the season, because he was an MVP this year, his third one. He was phenomenal. And you only made the second round. Nuggets can't let that happen again. They've got to come back, take a long summer off, and come back next year with a little bit more motivation, a little bit more intensity, and a little bit more appreciation for the moment in time that they find themselves in with an all-time great player. That does it today for Locked On Nuggets, guys. Thanks for hanging out with me. Sorry I didn't get to see the chats. I'll kind of scroll through them right now. And this episode will be up. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. I'll see you guys next time.